Imagine waking up one morning, and the city you've known your entire life has become something unrecognizable. The streets that were once alive with the smell of bread from the bakeries, the shouts of merchants, the laughter of children chasing each other through the cobblestone alleys, all of it gone, replaced by something far more chilling. Silence. A silence so thick, so complete, that you can hear your own heartbeat, and somewhere in the distance the slow, mournful toll of a bell. This is London. The year is 1665, and death has arrived. To truly understand what London felt like during the Great Plague, we need to step out of our modern world, with its hospitals, its antibiotics, its understanding of disease, and step into a city gripped by something it could not comprehend, could not cure, and could not stop. A city where a quarter of the population would be dead within 18 months. A city that would never quite be the same again. But let's begin at the beginning, because the plague didn't simply appear one day out of nowhere. It crept in quietly, almost politely, like a guest who arrives early before the party is ready. In the bitter winter of 1664, a comet was spotted flashing across the London sky. People stared up at it, wide-eyed and whispering. In those days, comets weren't marvels of astronomy, they were omens, harbingers of disaster. And the people of London would turn out to be tragically, horrifyingly right. The ground that winter was frozen solid from December through to March. The River Thames, that great artery of London life, was choked with ice, twice blocking all river traffic entirely. And perhaps that frozen winter actually held something back, because when the ice melted and the spring warmth began to breathe life back into the city, something else stirred alongside it. Something invisible, something deadly. The first cases appeared in a poor, overcrowded parish on the western fringe of the city, a place called St. Giles, in the fields. It began slowly, almost deceptively so. In April of 1665, a handful of deaths, then a few more in May, 43 recorded in total that month. That number sounds almost manageable, doesn't it? 43. Small enough that most Londoners brushed it aside. Small enough that the theaters were still open, still packing in 700 people an evening. Small enough that life, for most of the city, continued much as it always had. But the plague was not small. It was patient. It was waiting for the heat. When summer arrived that year, London became a tinderbox. The city was impossibly crowded, nearly 500,000 people packed into parishes and alleyways and tenements that were barely fit for half that number. Rubbish festered in the streets. Raw sewage ran in open channels. Rats scurried through the walls of homes and the dark underbellies of markets. And those rats, of course, carried the fleas. And those fleas carried a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, and that bacterium was the plague. The biology of the disease was something no one in 1665 understood at all. They didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about fleas. They blamed bad air, pestilential effluvia. They called it poisonous vapors rising from the earth, from swamps, from the unwashed bodies of the poor. Some blamed an unusual alignment of the planets. Others blamed the behavior of animals. More moles than usual, more flies, more frogs. And in their desperate search for something to do, they made decisions that would only deepen the catastrophe. Tens of thousands of dogs and cats were slaughtered, believed to be spreading the sickness. In the city alone, the dog catcher destroyed over 4,000 dogs, and with their natural predators gone, the rat population exploded. June of 1665 was when the horror truly began to announce itself.
The growing number
Over
of
6,000 people died that month. By July, more than 17,000, and then came August, the month that broke London's spirit entirely. At the peak of the epidemic in August and September of 1665, over 31,000 people died in a single month. Think about that for a moment. 31,000 human beings. Mothers, fathers, children, grandparents, merchants, servants, street vendors, physicians, all of them gone. At the very height of the outbreak, the death toll reached 7,165 souls in a single week. A single week. The church bells rang so constantly, so relentlessly, that some parishes were eventually forbidden from tolling them at all, because the sound alone was driving survivors to the edge of madness. And now, Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine what that felt like to live inside. You are a Londoner in the summer of 1665. You wake each morning not knowing whether this is the day you will notice a strange swelling under your arm, or in your groin, or in the crook of your neck. The buboes, that is what they're called. These swollen, agonizing lumps that swell in the lymph nodes, they grow with terrifying speed. Hard as stone, hot to the touch. Then, as the bacteria spreads through the blood, the skin turns black in patches. Festering, grotesque patches. The victim is racked by fever, by vomiting, by the most shattering headaches imaginable. The tongue swells, the eyes grow distant, and within 4 to 6 days of the first symptoms, for most people, it is over. There were different forms of the disease, and each one was more terrifying than the last. Bubonic plague, the most common, gave you those ugly swellings and a fighting chance, however slim. But pneumonic plague attacked the lungs. It spread through the air, through coughs and sneezes, person to person in a single breath, and septicemic plague entered the blood directly, racing through the body with horrifying efficiency. For these latter two forms, there was virtually no hope at all, and the treatments on offer, they would almost be comical if they weren't so desperately, heartbreakingly tragic. Physicians bled patients with leeches, believing that removing corrupted blood might help. Children were actually encouraged to smoke tobacco on the theory that puffing on a pipe would drive away the bad air. People stuffed sponges with vinegar and held them to their noses as they walked through the streets. Bonfires were lit at street corners to cleanse the air. Some physicians wore extraordinary beaked masks stuffed with dried herbs and flowers, a costume so eerie and otherworldly that it has haunted our collective imagination ever since. None of it worked. None of it could work, because none of it came even close to understanding what was actually happening. So what did London look like during all of this? What did it feel like to walk its streets? Samuel Pepys, the extraordinary naval administrator and diarist, whose daily journals give us perhaps the most intimate window into this catastrophe, described it with devastating simplicity. Walking through Westminster in October of 1665, he wrote that the streets were empty and melancholy, filled with poor sick people covered in sores, and that there was hardly a physician left alive in the entire district. He wrote of walking down Lombard Street, one of the city's great commercial thoroughfares, and not meeting 20 people from one end to the other. Lombard Street, empty, grass grew in the streets of Whitehall. Grass, in one of the most bustling, trafficked, overcrowded cities in the world, nature was quietly, stubbornly reclaiming the cobblestones. The wealthy, of course, fled. That was the great and ugly truth of the Great Plague. It was a catastrophe that divided London cruelly along lines of wealth. If you had money, you had options. King Charles Dapier and his entire royal court packed up and decamped to Oxford in early summer. Parliament held a shortened session away from London. Physicians and lawyers and merchants, and anyone with resources enough to sustain themselves elsewhere, they left. They left in great numbers, taking their households and their horses and their coaches rumbling out of the city gates and into the cleaner air of the countryside. But the poor had nowhere to go. When they tried to flee, and many did try, desperately, carrying their meager belongings on their backs, they were turned away at the edges of villages and towns. Armed men stood at roadblocks. "You are from London," they said. "You cannot pass." The countryside was terrified of the city, so the poor were trapped. Trapped with the rats, trapped with the fleas, trapped in their crowded tenements and their filthy alleyways, with no physician left to treat them, and no coin left to pay for medicine, even if there were. One of the most chilling responses to the plague was what the authorities called shutting up. When a plague case was identified in a household, just one case, even one, the entire family was sealed inside. The door was painted with a large red cross. Above it, in desperate lettering, the words, "Lord have mercy on us." A watchman was posted outside to ensure no one left. Provisions might be passed through a window, but the family inside was condemned to wait, to hope, and, far more often, to die together in the dark. You can imagine the terror this created. Because if being discovered meant being sealed into your home with a dying loved one and no escape,